Michael. Nice
Hello,
to meet
David.
you. How are you
Nice.
today?
I'm fine. Very good. Thank you. And I appreciate that I've been invited for this podcast.
Oh, that's my pleasure, and that's an honor because you are a very experienced person. You will discuss that during this podcast. And my first question, of course, is for people who may not know you. Can you just introduce yourself briefly, please?
Yeah, as you said, I've been around in the service management industry for quite some years, even before I know anything about ITIL. So I was doing configuration management back in the mid 80s. People might know me because I've been the chair of ITSMF International as well as ITSMF in Denmark. Currently, I'm a freelance consultant, so I have my own small business doing consultancy and training. So I'm a accredited instructor within ITIL and SIAM and do some training from time to time.
Okay, so quite a lot of activities. This podcast is about service and value management. That's why the podcast name is Value Streamed, refer to the value streams that is now used, for instance, in ITIL 4. And if I talk about ITIL 4, there is a definition of value in ITIL 4.
Mhm.
Do you agree with this definition of value, or what would be the definition of the value that can be enabled through services that are delivered, according to you?
I think the definition is quite good, and it even touches upon that there's both a tangible and an intangible part of value. Value is somewhat perceived; it's a perception. So I think that's quite specific and good. And you are right that it's mentioned in ITIL 4. In my mind, at least I've been around with ITIL version 2 and 3. In my mind, both those versions actually also included value that just didn't specify it. The aim has always been to deliver value in the form of services. And I know the history of ITIL, and it has progressed from having a functional focus to a process focus to a life cycle focus and now to a value focus. That has been a long journey over, well, more than 30 years. But now we are there, and I think there's a lot of stuff in ITIL that we can utilize. And it has become a value in itself.
Mhm. And when we talk about value, one thing also is we always talk about value for the mainly we talk about value from the point of view of the customer.
Mhm.
But what could be an example of value from the point of view of another stakeholder from your point of view?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's quite obviously that the primary uh, stakeholder that we're trying to address and give value is the customer or the consumer, as it's also called now in ITIL 4. Uh, but if we talk enterprise management, then value is not only within the business. Many people think that enterprise management is all about including facility management and HR in their service management. But in my mind, true enterprise service management is when you utilize service management principles outside of IT within your business organization, and that value when it hits the customer of our customer, so the customer of the business, the people that have a mobile phone subscription, for example, then we have succeeded when the value reaches out so far in the setup. Do you get my point?
Yes, yes, of course. I had also it also I think it's clear. I also wanted also to add another example on that, and also related to the measurement of value. I give you one example. If we say that the value for stakeholders is, for instance, that we comply with some regulatory requirements.
Mm.
Let's give a simple example from Europe, the GDPR
Yes.
requirement. Okay. In fact, what is the value? The value of being compliant with GDPR is that you will not pay the fine that can be 4% of your total income as a huge organization.
Mm.
Is it a value? So in fact, is it a value? So that means you don't create anything, but what you do is that you prevent to have a big loss.
Mm.
Does it fit to the definition of value?
Yeah, I get your point, and I have had the same thoughts. So, for example, does the process of incident management provide a value, or is it just a reduction of loss? And I think
Yes.
it's actually the latter, that it's just a reduction of loss. The better you are at incident management, the smaller your loss will be. But still, that has some sort of value that you're actually doing that. So, if I may, I would like to come with an example of very real value and value for the business. Have you ever heard of the Danish company Vestas? They make
No.
they make wind turbines, windmills,
Okay.
those big 200 meters high windmills in the ocean. Some of them are from Vestas, a Danish company, and you might see that company as a product company, the product being the windmills, but actually a big percentage of their business is services. And they use service management, not IT service management, but enterprise service management to control that and provide value to their customers, which could be energy companies, for example. And not only do they make service maintenance, for example, on their own windmills, they also do that on on their competitors' windmills. I think that's true enterprise service management, and a true picture of where do we see the value. Well, the value is at the energy company that have bought the windmill and have a subscription on a yearly maintenance review and whatever is needed to make sure that the windmill is still working as it's supposed to.
So your example is a good example of value, and you also said that you and I said that when I introduced you to our audience is that you are not only an instructor but also an assessor.
Hmm.
When we talk about, for instance, the maturity assessment, you are an assessor for, and you can, I think, assess the level of maturity according to, for instance, ITIL-4 maturity model.
Yeah.
So, what is your view about the usefulness of this assessment for value management? Is there any? Do we need them, and why?
So in my mind, if you do an assessment, you need to look at both the as is and the to be situation. Just assessing your current maturity level or capability level doesn't bring any value. But if you have both the current situation and what you desire in the future, then you can close that gap, and hopefully that will elevate you up to a higher maturity level and enable you to provide more value to your customers and consumers and users. So I have always seen assessments as a very valuable tool if they are used the right way. You need to be able to close a gap, so it's very important to look at both current and future states.
And when you do this assessment, what is the main motivation of the customer? Do they want to know where they are, where they want to be? Do they just want to get from you an external view on this, or do they also push you to be their kind of coach for the gap analysis and the roadmap of what to do? In other words, do they want the diagnostic or do they want the roadmap?
Most want a roadmap. In very rare cases, they just want, and that could be for compliance reasons. They just want a view on the current state, so they can document to authorities, for example, that they are right. I think if that's the case, then a ISO certification in the 20,000 standard would be a better option. So it's always with the intent of improving and thereby adding more value and closing gaps and elevating your maturity level in my mind.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear. And did you also were you also an ISO 20000 auditor, by the way?
No, I've been working with ISO 20000 and been part of the international working group many years ago. It has never really been mainstream here in Denmark. There are very few companies that have actually been certified in ISO 20000. So that has not been a focus and a big way for me at any point in time.
Mhm. That's also that's you know, when that reminds me the last episode I had with David Cannon, when he said that you can have an organization that, for instance, a bank that complies with many regulatory or standard requirements, but doesn't mean that this organization, based on that, can create more value. So in fact, you know, being, let's say, ISO 20000 certified assures a certain level of quality, but does not implicitly assure a certain level of value. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, you can be very mature and provide no value at all. Just like, let me give you a related example. Uh, you could meet a person that is ITIL master, like you and me, uh, but knows absolutely nothing about service management. I mean, if you are a good student, you can pass the exams, but you might not be able to provide any value because you don't know how to apply and implement in real life. So that also applies for organizations that where you can have all kind of certificates and be compliant with GDPR and the European Bank and whatever, depending on the business you are in. Uh, that's not the same as being able to provide value. You could argue that it's part of the foundation for being able to provide value. And now you mentioned David. One thing I noticed in the interview or the podcast with David was that he emphasized that you must start with the basics. So
Yes.
so remember to include the basics still and realize that many organizations are still struggling with the basics, even if we have had ITIL around for more than 30 years.
Oh, yes, I totally agree with you. That's also the reason maybe why the when you just look, you mentioned, for instance, the ITIL certification, and it's true that when you look just at the ITIL certification, just see the figures. 90% of the exams that are sold in ITIL are at the foundation level
Mm,
only.
yeah,
Because of that, because organization needs to have people who are ITIL certified just to be sure that they understand it. But many organizations still have about 5, 6, I would say, ITIL practices now, or processes in the previous version, in place. So the level of adoption and level of maturity in organization is quite low, in fact, or
yeah.
lower than we can expect.
Yeah, and that could prevent value really, and it's really a shame. And it has been. I mean, I've been an instructor for 20 years in ITIL, and this 90% is ITIL Foundation was also true back then. People didn't attend, or not many people attended the next level of certifications, which is really a shame. I think Axelos and PeopleCert have not really done a good job of promoting the next level. They're not positioned it correctly, so people are in doubt. I think the new stream of ITIL 4 training and certifications, the practice manager stream, is probably going to lift it, because now people can see something that they recognize from real life. Some of the other books are, well, they're not wrong, but they are quite academic. So the ordinary people, the people in the service desk, are struggling to understand the concepts of the service value system,
Yeah.
which is an academic way of describing what's actually going on. So it's not wrong at all. It's spot on, but for some people that is a challenge, and I do hope that these practice manager certifications will open up a door for more people to actually progress beyond ITIL Foundation, because talking about value, ITIL Foundation doesn't provide any value at all, or hardly any value, I would say. It is the foundation, it is the entry point that will give you an overview, will give you some of the terminology, but it will not enable you to provide any value at all.
Oh, yes, you're absolutely right. We can say that there are some conditions that are, necessary but not sufficient
Mm,
to produce value, and that's the problem in value management. That's the problem. The problem of service management versus value management is that service value management, on my point of view, and I want to know your view on that, relies on these necessary conditions, but not the sufficient condition to create value. Why? Because we as a service provider, you know what you can control. What you can control is service delivery. What you can influence, what you can just influence, is the service consumption, and that's where value is realized.
mm, mm. Yeah,
So
yeah,
so
I totally agree that value happens when you provide from the provider side and you consume from the consumer side. That's when you utilize as a service, and services are by nature intangible, so you can't put them on the shelf and pull them down again at a later stage where you need them. You have to use it now. It is this interaction, and that's the co-creation mindset is new in ITIL, and is just so spot on, how value should be created. The question is how, well, we have talked about that just a few minutes ago, how value is created, and how value is defined. I mean, there's a good definition of value in the ITIL books, but that's value in itself. What is valuable for the consumer? And if you ask the consumer, in most cases, they will not be able to answer. What is value to me? Well, I really don't know. So how to get the requirements, how to get the value statements from your consumers? That's the challenge, I think.
yeah, absolutely right. And also when we talk about the service consumption, there is also one thing I would like you to discuss with me is the resistance to change. So you have a new service,
Mhm.
and you have, of course, people who were, let's say, part of designing, implementing this change, and majority of the users who just, got this change imposed by somebody else, with a lot of resistance for change. And
Mhm.
in ITIL 4, they have the organizational change management to handle that. And I saw that you are also ProSky specialist. Can you tell me more about this ProSky and how we can use it for change management?
I will, but before I do that, let me just tell you something that I find interesting and that most people don't know. Um, the organizational change management part or people change management part was actually described already in ITIL version 2. One of the best books, I mean, everybody that was around at that time at least knows that there was a service design and there was the service support books, and that
Yes.
was what you were taught in foundation and practitioner and manager classes. But there were 8 other books in ITIL version 2. And one of the best was written by Colin Rudd, who is one of the grandfathers of ITIL. And it's called Implementing Service Management or IT Service Management. Can't really recall that. And that included a chapter about organizational change management. In ITIL version 3, we got a little bit in the practitioner book. And you're right now that in ITIL 4 we have a practice around organizational change management. And my step towards actually doing that training and taking that certification began with the fact that, well, I saw technology being implemented, but in a year it would fail. I say, well, there's something missing. And I said, well, it could be processes. And that helped a little bit, but still we didn't really succeed long term. The solution would fail. So well, we might need to have a service a life cycle view on this, so we maintain and decommission at the very end. Still, we would fail. And I came to the conclusion we need to have some organizational change management. And I might come to another conclusion in 5 years that we, on top of that, need something else. But you're right that I've done the ProSci change practitioner training and certification. And I wouldn't call myself a specialist in organizational change management. I just see a need to include organizational change management whenever you do any sort of service management implementation, because implementing new services, implementing new processes, or improving existing processes, for example, is by definition a change. You will change the way of working, and you need to apply a bit of organizational change management and do it all the time. And ProSci is in my mind, a very good framework for that. The ITIL book I mentioned back from around 2000, implementing service management, points at the is a 7 or 8 step cutter model. That's another framework for organizational change management. That's not really important. The important part is that you actually do it. Otherwise, you are bound to fail. And one thing you should remember, organizational change management is not something you just do while you are running a project. It's also something you should be doing within operations. So when you go live, you need to continue organizational change management, because what would happen is that people will fall back. Just like the improvement model of ITIL in continual improvement. So how do you keep up momentum? That also applies for change management, organizational change management.
Yes, you're right, and that's also remind me it's the one of the key role. Many people talk about service desk agents, but many people forget about the change agents. And the
Mm,
change agents is a role that exactly do what you say. They are here to, in terms of organizational change management, to set up and be sure that the communication is at the right level for the change, but they also are here to be sure that the change is sustainable. I mean, remains
exactly.
in the organization.
Yeah.
So you need this, and in many organizations it's like project management. You are happy when your project is finished, and after the project, it's another story. And and
Yeah.
and and change
And
is a kind of project, you know.
and since we're talking about value, so what is one of the last steps? Well, actually, after the project has been closed, that's a value realization. So have you realized your value?
Yes.
What happens to this step? Well, it's forgotten. It's never done because people are on to the next project, or the project budget has already been used, so there's no money to have this very important final workshop or how you facilitate it.
Yeah. 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 I totally agree with you. What is interesting is that all the organizations I know and you know agree with that. With that, but very few wants to address it.
Mm,
You know, it's like when we talk about, for instance, learn from experience that we have in Prince too. Okay, when you say that you have to learn from experience, you learn from your experience, not to repeat the same mistakes. Everybody agree with that, you know. Everybody
mm,
agree with the fact that you have to learn not to avoid to repeat the same mistake. At the end of the day, people keep repeating the same mistake.
mm.
Why? That's the question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just like people will never learn from history.
Yeah,
So
that's it.
mm, agree.
Okay. Thank you for that. We are now coming to the nearly end of our podcast. Before I have my traditional word about Czech language, because as you know, I live in Prague, so and
Mm,
I try to, as a French, I try to promote Czech language. Weird, but
mm.
that's it. Do you have anything that you wanted to add to a message to our audience related to value management or not?
Well, I think we have said quite a lot during this podcast. I think one of the messages that I gave through during the podcast was it's good that we have this definition of value, but even more important, figure out what is actually value for your business. And that's why I mean roles like the business analyst and the practice of business analysis have now been included in ITIL, and the aim is for this practice and this role is to together with the business define what is actually value, what are the requirements that we need to fulfill, how can we bring value to you, what kind of solution should be implemented, and trying to translate what the business thinks is value into, for example, technical solutions. That's a huge step, but you really need to start with identifying what is valuable for the business, and then you can translate that into IT requirements. That's why I mentioned I was one of the reviewers of the Drive Stakeholder Values. So the customer journey described in that book, I think, is very good. It's a very good approach to figure out what is value, setting all of up with personas and stuff like that. Have a look if you haven't read the Drive Stakeholder Value book, then that's one book I would recommend that you start with after you have done your ITIL foundation.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate this last advice, and I really appreciate your insightful view on all this topic that we covered in this podcast.
You're welcome.
So now I will say you one Czech word. I'm not sure that you will remember it or not, but now the
Uh,
new thing is that I will put on the podcast. I will write it down for people to know it.
mhm.
So the word in Czech is about change. In Czech, change is změna. Změna. That's the word in Czech. Změna.
Okay. I will not even try to pronounce it.
Yeah. And what they say in Czech, they say změna je život. What it means that change is life, which
Yeah.
I think is quite a good definition of the
So,
change. Because in fact,
so
it's like in Agile, we embrace change. We cannot live without change.
I have another interpretation of that. The only constant is change.
Yeah.
So I think that's very similar to what
Yes,
you just said
exactly.
in Czech. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the last philosophical moment of this podcast. I really thank you, Michael, for being my guest today. It was really my pleasure to have you with us today.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's not the last time we talk together.
No, I hope not. But at least we can comment on each other's posts on LinkedIn.
We already do that.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best of luck. If anybody wants to approach you for any services that you provide, because you provide quite large range of services, what is the best ways? Directly on LinkedIn to contact you?
LinkedIn is a good way of getting in touch, and I'm quite open to invitations. So please look up my profile on LinkedIn and send me an invite, and then we can take it from there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. See
Thank
you.
you, Thank you,
Thank you.
David.
Bye
See
bye.
you. Bye.